And this is Seattle's Morning News. In British Columbia, discoveries of unmarked graves at former so-called residential schools for Indigenous children have shaken Canada and brought about new scrutiny to these decades-old reports of missing and abused children. There are parallels on this side of the border, too, and our resident historian Feliks Banel is here with that part of the story. Felix is brought to us by Lake Washington Windows and Doors. Felix.
Yeah, this is a complex story about generational trauma, and it requires sensitivity. In the time we have this morning, we can really just scratch the surface. In late May, the Kamloops Indian Band in British Columbia announced they discovered the unmarked graves of 215 children on the grounds of the old Kamloops Indian Residential School. That was operated from 1890 to 1978. It's a horrific discovery. It's traumatized people and shaken Canadian culture and society to the core. It appears to be forcing a reckoning between Indigenous people and everyone else. Other unmarked graves have been discovered in Canada, including on Penellicut Island near the San Juans just a few days ago. Now, these residential schools in Canada were government-funded and often run by religious organizations, including the Catholic Church. Many people believe they were part of a systematic effort to wipe out Indigenous culture. Kill the Indian and save the man is the old saying. Separate kids from their families, their language, their spiritual practices. There are also places where physical and sexual abuse clearly happened and where countless Indigenous kids just went missing. Now, it's being taken very seriously in Canada. The government there has set up a trauma hotline. The media coverage is intense. This past Canada Day, that's their national holiday, it was on July 1st, was somber this year. There were Indigenous demonstrations. The country seems to have lost its taste for celebrations. It seems like there's a reckoning at hand in Canada. Now, a similar system of schools existed in the United States, including here in Washington. Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland, who's the first Indigenous person to hold that job, announced in late June the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative, which is described as a comprehensive review of the troubled legacy of federal boarding school policies. Now, my sense, and I'm not alone in this, is that we're headed for a similar reckoning on this side of the border. I reached out to Michael Finley. He's a former tribal chair, and he's historian for the Colville tribe. He said the stories of abused and missing kids and the true intent of Indian schools are common knowledge in tribal communities.
It's a very traumatizing era in our history that isn't well known to the general public, but it should be. But it's only finds like this where people finally start to pay attention to what we've always been saying. And so our voices have been muted by a lot of different efforts. But this is a very systematic, a very deliberate attempt to wipe us off the map.
Like many Indigenous people, Michael speaks from personal knowledge. His father attended the Pascal Sherman Indian School in Omak. He was sexually abused there by a priest. He witnessed violent abuse of other students. And one of his great aunts has shared stories of when her sister was sent to Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania.
And she talked about her older sister that got sent off to Carlisle when she was younger. And they didn't hear for weeks that she had died. And the only answer they got when they said that she died way over at Carlisle was that, she took a shower, she put her head out the window to talk to somebody from her dorm room, and it was midwinter, and she caught pneumonia and died. And there was no more answer than that. But she talked about the pain of that.
Michael Finley says family histories like this are the rule, not the exception.
There's many stories like this that are painful, and they run through our generations today through their historical trauma that a lot of people don't want to recognize or talk about. But it's very real, and I guarantee you if it happened in any other scenario, it would be headlines everywhere. But for some reason, because it happened to Native people, nobody wants to give it the same level of credence that they would otherwise. And I hate to say it that way, but it's true. And we're the survivors of that historic trauma, but we're here to tell the story, and we're not going anywhere.
I also spoke with Shelley Boyd. She's Michael Finley's cousin. She coordinates a legal effort related to traditional lands in Canada. Now, that Colville Reservation in north central Washington is separated from other Indigenous groups by the international border. But people like Michael Finley and Shelley Boyd, who live there, they're geographically and culturally close to the people who attended that school in Kamloops.
The message that I feel that we have had generationally was that either that didn't happen or you're exaggerating it, or I think of it in terms of even our, as Sinixt people, our connection to Kamloops is that the territory right next to our territory in Canada. And I 100% believe that some of our people are part of those unmarked graves, right? And there's no finding out who they are.
Yeah, I reached out to the Department of Interior to find out what's next for Secretary Howland's initiative. There's records to comb through at places like the National Archives at Sandpoint. There's families to talk to gather personal stories, perhaps even archaeological field work like what's happening in Canada. Nobody really knows for sure. I also spoke with Craig Bill. He's executive director of Jay Inslee's Governor's Commission on Indian Affairs. He told me there were 13 federal Indian boarding schools in Washington. The biggest ones on the west side of the mountains were Tulalip near Marysville and Cushman near Tacoma. There are also a number of day schools. I'm not sure how many. There is no one place where all this information has been gathered yet. I asked Michael Finley what people in the Puget Sound area, maybe hearing the story, who think they have no personal connection to Indigenous people, what they can do. He said, number one, please hear the stories. And then he said one more thing.
Have them put themselves in our shoes. You're sitting there living the same life that your people have lived for thousands of years. And this new group of people comes in and it's like, we don't like how you guys are living, and we're going to take your kids, we're going to move them 100, 200, 300 miles away, and they can't speak your guys' language anymore. We're going to cut their hair, which is part of our culture, and they can't practice anything they've done before. We're going to make you do things the way we want you to do them. Imagine today if that happened in America, where we had somebody come in and do that to their children and ask them if they'd still be okay with it. They won't be.
And both Michael Finley and Craig Bill told me they're certain that unmarked graves will be discovered in Washington too. Whether the numbers are the same magnitude as Canada is harder to say. There's definitely more to come on this story, and I'm going to do a few more stories on this for sure in the near term. A detailed report's coming out tomorrow from the Kamloops Band with more details about the 215 graves they've identified up there. For the Secretary of Interior, it's unclear what's going on with that report. I don't think any steps have been taken here yet, but the idea is to have a final report by April of 2022. So there's much more to come. This is one of those things where, we're good at pointing out genocides in other parts of the world.
That's right.
But here at home, and I love America unconditionally. I'm glad every day. I'm grateful my immigrant parents chose this country to come and settle. But there's stuff like this that we need to kind of daylight. Otherwise, we're going to be just mired in the same problems we've had for more than a century.
There was that arrogance that our way of life is superior to yours, and by God, we're going to impose it on you.
Yeah, and we're headed for a reckoning, and it's the sooner we get into the truthful part of it, the happier or the more healing will happen.